And actually, I'm going to start out by a reading from. You start. We'll start with a reading from a proverb. Blessed, or you can pronounce it blessed. Blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding. For she, and in this case, the person that wrote this proverb was personifying something that it wasn't a person, right? Because we're talking about the wisdom and understanding. And he's calling it she. For she, wisdom, is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. That's Proverbs 3:13-14. That's what the proverb says. But a king, and we don't have too many kings left. We've got some kings in name only, but we're not ruled. Most of the countries are walk. I mean, there are certainly kings, but countries are walking away from that and wanting to have a more people-centered, people in power. Let's put it this way: the king of a domain sees things in the reverse, don't you think? His eyes are on the silver and gold. The wisdom, it just is. They may think they're wise in their own eyes, but really what they're after, if you look at it, is they're after power and they're after wealth. And that's not just a king, obviously. We see this in our own government. We've got people that are. It takes quite an effort to keep your mind focused on using wisdom in making your decisions instead of saying, how much will I earn out of this? What's it going to benefit me if I do this? When you need to make important decisions, your wealth will not help you, but wisdom will. This is why when Solomon was questioned by God, this is when God was going to, you're going to be the king in your father David's place. Ask me anything and I'll give it to you, is what God basically said to him. But instead of wealth, what did Solomon ask for?
Wisdom.
He asked for wisdom. What was he going to use the wisdom for?
To rule the people, right?
Because he had this huge number of people, and he was only one person. And he would have to make some wise decisions and wise choices. And he, I think in his flesh, was pretty overwhelmed by the prospect of having to deal with all those people. And so he asks him for wisdom, and what did God do? He not only gave him the wisdom, but he also gave him the wealth and all of the stuff that goes along with being a king. And if you've never read the story of the decision that Solomon made between the two women that were fighting over the child, you need to read that. Because that was wisdom. And this is in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 7 to 12. Now you remember Belshazzar. And I need to tell you, we have. You did already. Okay, good. I won't be needing to say anything. Okay. Belshazzar was no Solomon. Belshazzar was the one that took the place of his father, Nebuchadnezzar, and as ruler over, as emperor, as whatever of the Babylonian kingdom, the Neo-Babylonian kingdom. But he wasn't a Solomon. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar really was not a Solomon either, and it took almost his entire life to learn that important lesson about humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and then He'll lift you up. But Belshazzar, if anybody, they would never remember Belshazzar, but we will all remember the story where we get the expression, "Can't you read the writing on the wall?" The hand writing on the wall. Okay, that's where Belshazzar, that's where he comes in. The only wise move that showed any kind of wisdom was to seek the wisdom of Daniel. Because remember, Daniel was actually in charge of all of the wise men of the palace. I would say the palace, because that's where they were all staying. Because he had shown Nebuchadnezzar on numerous occasions just not so much how smart he was, but, and he made a point, right, of saying, you want me to interpret your dream? I'll interpret your dream. But I want you to know that it's not me. I'm praying to God to ask for the interpretation. He's given it to me and I'm passing it on. I'm the middleman. And he never ever took credit for what God was doing, which was one of the reasons why Daniel is the perfect person to model our lives. So Daniel was brought before the king, Belshazzar, and the king explained the dilemma that he was in. So what was the dilemma? They're having this drunken brawl of sorts in the palace. Belshazzar decides after he's had enough to drink, it says the brain's not working anymore, now it's just the alcohol is working, and he decides to give the order that all of the golden and silver goblets and vessels that were taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, that Nebuchadnezzar had done that, but Belshazzar's saying, bring all those in there, into here. And they were drinking wine out of these sacred goblets, vessels. And at the same time that they're doing it, as if it wasn't bad enough that they were desecrating these vessels, they're toasting the pagan gods.
Marduk.
The gods of stone and gold and of wood and of whatever. The king explained, like he had already really said before, the wise men had been brought in. Well, first of all, the wise men came in. Okay, so please, here's the deal. Tell me what this writing is that I see on the wall, because this is really freaking me out. I can't read it, and even if I knew the words, I couldn't interpret it, what it's trying to tell me. And they went, we don't know. We have no idea. We have no clue. So the queen says, oh, you need to get Daniel, because Daniel really helped out your father a lot with hard problems like this, interpretations. And so the king explained what the reward was going to be for whoever could come up with the interpretation, right? And this is in verse 17. And Daniel was told the same thing. Well, Daniel, they tell me that you know all things about dreams and interpretations. So if you do this, this is what will happen. You're going to get, the silver chain around your neck and the whole deal. But Daniel wasn't impressed. Because it was God who was going to answer the question, not me. In other words, why should I be rewarded for something God's doing? This is totally the reverse of the way the world looks at things. If you had an inside track on some information and you gave an answer and all of a sudden the person that you're giving the answer to or the advice to is all so impressed with you, instead of you saying, well, it really wasn't me, no, you'd say, oh, thank you. I'll take the reward. No. Now, maybe for the first time in his life, the king had heard from Daniel about the real source of his power. Verse 18. O king, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. In other words, you may have thought that all of these things came from the fact that he had a huge army and he inherited part of it from his father. But Daniel's saying, as long as I've got an audience here, as long as you're listening to what I've got to say, I've got something to tell you. You're not the source of your power. You wouldn't have the power if God hadn't given it to you. The Most High God gave your father. He had absolute power and authority over all the people of his kingdom. He had absolute control over their lives. He could order them executed. He could spare their lives. He could promote them. Or he could humble them. Verse 19. So now Daniel continues the history of his father, Belshazzar's father, Nebuchadnezzar. Now I think from what we read in this same chapter, I think we realize that Belshazzar must have heard this about his father. It's actually in secular history that that Nebuchadnezzar had kind of had a time when he went kind of off his wheels and kind of like a mental lapse. But he says, so he's just said he had all this absolute power, he had all these things going for him, but when his heart became arrogant and prideful, he was deposed. He was taken off of his throne. And sometimes when we hear that, oh, he was deposed, it makes it seem that some other human being or group of people, in other words, there was a coup, maybe a military coup where they came in and took away his power. And we know that it was God that did this. He was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory, verse 20. The story of how his father had been driven away from people was recounted. So he went over this again. His father, Nebuchadnezzar, had been driven away from other human beings. It's a little hard to be proud and arrogant when, one, you're not sitting on your throne anymore. Two, you're driven away from other human beings. You're like driven off into the forest somewhere. And when you were basically lost your mind, you no longer have a human being's perspective on things. You're like an animal. All of this happened, and he was told it would happen until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all the kingdoms of men. Verse 21. Instead of humbling others before him, which is what most kings did at that time, he was humbled. He was humbled. Now, 3 charges are brought against his son, Belshazzar. Belshazzar was suffering from the same pride that had brought Nebuchadnezzar to his knees. Unfortunately, Nebuchadnezzar got a second chance, didn't he? He acknowledged that God was sovereign, and he was brought back to his throne, given his power and authority over again, and probably, hopefully, doesn't say, but hopefully he continued for whatever period of time God gave him to live a better life than the one that he had been living. Now Daniel speaks, and this starts in verse 23. But you, his son, so he's speaking to Belshazzar, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. See, when he says, and you knew all this, makes me realize you knew about your father. You knew how God had humbled him. But instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heavens. You refused to acknowledge that God was over you in authority and in power and in sovereignty. And so you said, I'm not paying any attention to that. I know that what happened to my father, that's what happened to my father, and then that's not going to happen. How many times have you heard that? Oh, that'll never happen to me.
I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah, I'm not. This might have happened to him. He was weak, or he was whatever. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was nothing. He certainly was not weak. Okay, so number one. Remember, there are 3 charges that were brought against him. You had the sacred vessels brought to you, thus defying God by desecrating them with the wine of your drunken feast. Okay, so that was the first charge. If you would have left those sacred vessels in the treasury of your God, then you would have been far better off. But you let your pride, it's show and tell, right? You want to say, oh, I've got all these people. I've got all of my nobles. I mean, hundreds, maybe 1,000 nobles and their wives. And he had, and I kind of get the impression that his wife wasn't there. And he's gonna show off. While praising the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron and wood and stone, you praised idols and so did not honor God. Well, first of all, you had to believe that there was a one living God. That all these other idols were nothing but objects of stone. That was verse 23. So for these reasons, God sent the hand that wrote the inscription, verse 24. what was that old cultural expression you say? Talk to the hand.
Mm.
You got something to say? Talk to the hand. I'm not going to talk to you. This is the inscription that was written on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel, parson. Verse 25. And this is what the words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. So you're not going to get a second chance to repent and then have your kingdom back, because what you don't know is what I know, the Lord says. I know who's going to be over this kingdom, and it isn't going to be you. If he would have known about the statue with the golden head that Nebuchadnezzar had made, he'd realize that there was the shoulders of silver that were going to take the place of the head of gold, and Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. So I'm thinking tekel's got something to do with weights, like we say a shekel. A shekel is nothing more than, it's not the name of a coin, it's the weight. You've been weighed on the scales, and you're found wanting. Parson. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. After completing the translation, at the command of Belshazzar, Daniel was clothed in purple, which is, of course, color of royalty. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was made third highest in the kingdom. Now, the whole story of what happened to Belshazzar that night, because it says that very night Belshazzar was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So Darius was 62 years old when he took over the kingdom, which is kind of interesting. First of all, I didn't think people lived very long anyway, so you'd think he would have been a lot younger than that. But there is a story about how when Darius came into the palace, that he met no resistance, because first of all, everyone was drunk. If you're the one with the sober army and you're coming in, you'd walk in and probably not a shot was fired, kind of thing. And they were able to take it over. So the head of gold of Nebuchadnezzar's statue is now no more. Remember, the statue had the head of gold and had the shoulders, two shoulders, Medo-Persians. You don't hear too much of the Medes after this. It's mainly the Persians that took over. But there's one thing that did not change, and that was that Daniel continued to be part of this Medo-Persian kingdom. It's very interesting that Daniel was there for the entire time Nebuchadnezzar, pretty much the entire his reign, as an advisor. He had become an advisor. And now he's going to be with the Medes and Persians. And we know that if and maybe we're going to see this in the other other chapters to come. But Daniel is going to be important in getting God's agenda brought forward. Because there's another king of the Persians called Cyrus that's going to be coming up. And he's going to be the one that's going to allow the people of Judah, or the Jews in other words, to return back to rebuild the temple. And so this is going to be it's very interesting to see how God orchestrates things, because that's exactly what's going on here. So what do we get from this? The big thing that I get from of it, of course, is that if I was going to follow the example of a human being that was used mightily by God, it would be Daniel. Because Daniel was always faithful to God. He never turned his back on him. He never tried to take any honor and glory away from God. He always acknowledged God. And we learned a while back, which led to when he was thrown into the lion's den, which didn't work out so well. It didn't work out well for the lions either, because they missed a meal. He was in the situation where he prayed 3 times a day. He opened up the window that faced toward Jerusalem, and he would pray to God 3 times a day, every day. And when they saw him doing that, that's the whole story that we've been over. But he didn't say, "Oh, I wasn't really praying. I was just meditating." Well, okay. So you were praying. Oh yeah, okay, I was praying. He didn't try to get out of it. He didn't try to say, "You guys are hallucinating." He didn't try to wiggle out of it. If you're a king and you've got somebody that you're depending on for all of these important decisions, are you going to want that person to be the kind of person that tries to wiggle out of everything? I don't think so. Because I want somebody that's going to be faithful. No matter what it is, they're faithful. In fact, what did we find out about the wise men? The very first time that they tried to go after, before they came up with this plan of having this decree about no one is to pray for 30 days unless they're praying to you, O king, live forever. In fact, it's recorded right there in Scripture that the wise men said, we can't find anything wrong with Daniel. He's not dishonest. He's not taking bribes. We can't manipulate him. What you see is what you get, and that's basically, they saw that and they said the only thing that we can go after Daniel on is his faith in his God. Because we know he's going to pray 3 times a day. He's not going to skip a day. He's not going to do, well, maybe I'll pray today, maybe I won't. So to have that kind of a reputation, that people can depend on you because your word, you're an honest person. Your word is your how do they go? Your word is your bond. That's the way we want to be. Even if it means sometimes we take the heat. So what? If we said, well, what does the Scripture say? Let your yes be yes and your no be no. So if you're going to say to somebody, I'll be there at 3 o'clock, you better be there at 3 o'clock. Or you better, at 2 o'clock, you better be calling them and saying, which we have that advantage now, right? we could call and we can say, I told you 3 o'clock, but something's really has come up and I really won't be able to make it. But this thing of, where is he? It's 10 after 3. It's 20 after 3. It's 3:30. Where the heck is he? He said he was going to be here at 3. Oh, that's right. He works for the government. He has no time schedule to follow. He can just do whatever he wants to do. No, I didn't mean that. Yes, I do mean that. So look, we can don't listen to these great. I mean, these are great stories as well. Mini-series written all over that. Don't just take that as a story and say, what could I possibly learn from that? Because I'm not in Babylon. I'm not in Persia. Well, I kind of think we are in Babylon. But you better look at that and say, what can I glean from this? Lord, you put this Daniel in here for a reason. I think he's worth emulating, following his behavior and the way that he dealt. Because it's the same God. That part hasn't changed. He may be dressed funny and have a turban on his head and all this other stuff, but it's the same God. Same God that we're praying to. So don't let, and that's a great, and by the way, that's I think an excellent way to approach with our grandchildren, and our children, if we've still got kids. There's nobody that young in here, is it? Well, I guess, no, there isn't. Well, yeah, I guess you are. What a show off.
Young girl, you.
So, we need to say, as we're reading through Bible stories and whatever, and say, look, yeah, Noah was on the ark, and he did have all these animals on the ark, and you can get lost in the story, but you need to say, what is the application? We've read the story, we've interpreted the story. Now the third leg of that stool is called application. How are we going to apply this to our life? Well, Noah was faithful. 150 years worth of faithful, building this boat, this
Everybody
ark.
laughing at him saying, oh, what an idiot.
And just Google the ark. What is it called? The ark. I mean, the ark that Ken Ham built. That's in Kentucky.
The Kentucky Ark.
The Ark Project, I think, is what it's called. And look at the size of that. Look at this. Look at the size of that ark. So here's Noah, and he was faithful. And it wasn't that he was perfect, because he wasn't perfect. So we need to say to him, okay, we've read this story. Now, what have you learned about this? What was this person like? Do you think you would like to be like that? Mm-hmm. And give them we sometimes have a tendency to want to read the story and say, oh, isn't that a cute little story? Little giraffes on the ark and all this kind of thing. But there's so much more to it. A teaching moment, right?
Amen.
Okay, Mr. Gross.